Hi, good afternoon. It has been a long time since I've done a lesson, and I think that's because I wasn't inspired by anything to teach to do a lesson. But I've been reading this really neat book, and it brought up the brain and kind of, I don't know, made me think more about the brain and how cool it was and how it's something that I'd like to talk a bit about, just some of the basic things behind it, to give you a gist of why it's so cool. Um, so the brain is everything. As a kid, I remember being very fascinated by the brain. And I think it's because I saw so much cool stuff out and about in the world and had so many daydreams and imaginations and things. And it was all happening in my head. And I was like, well, how does that work? How can I be, how do dreams happen? And how do I remember my spelling tests? And how do I, whatever. And that's when I realized it was all the brain. So, we're going to do some basic anatomy and physiology of the brain, but it won't be that in depth because when you study the brain, it makes you have more questions about the brain. So it's a continual topic to study. So hopefully this little lesson will help spur you to want to learn more about it on your own and in your own free time, your own research. Okay, so the brain. The brain is the size of two fists, your two fists put together. It makes up about 2% of your complete body weight. Okay? There we go. So that's the size of your brain. And it goes right into your head. It's not here. It's not there. It's right up here in your head. So I did some pictures. And this person looks like a chipmunk, but that's because I was trying to make it look like it was facing forward, and I wasn't good at art as a kid. So, but basically, the human brain is composed of 4 lobes. And what makes humans humans and more unique is a place in the brain called your prefrontal cortex. Okay? All living things have a nervous system. We call ours the brain. There's brains of fish and stuff. But to be more specific, it's the nervous system. Fish have different nervous systems than reptiles, which have different nervous systems, and worms, which have, but they all do the same thing. They regulate the organism. Now, humans developed a prefrontal cortex, and that gave us more conscious thought, the ability to think ahead and plan, and an increase in our social interactions. And this probably really started when cavemen, long time ago, were the first tribes and hunter-gatherers, were having to communicate more, and were having to plan ahead more for food and harvesting and stuff. And that's when this came along to help us become who we are today as humans. So the prefrontal cortex is located in your frontal lobe. Frontal lobe's right in the front of your head. It's about my bangs. We'll use my bangs and my hair to map the brain, I guess. But so there's your frontal lobe. Now if you go down a bit, actually, here, we'll talk about what the frontal lobe does. It's basically in charge of all conscious thought. Okay? So it's the most unique of all human brain structures. It's in charge of what you are aware of what's happening. Consciousness, awareness. Now if you go down a bit to this area here, so starting about the headband down to the ear, there, that's your temporal lobe. Your temporal lobe senses smell and sound, and it also helps process complex stimuli such as faces or senses, so the ability to recognize that that's President Obama on TV, and different scenes, so the ability to go to a baseball game and process what's around you and recognize it. Temporal lobe. Right about the temporal lobe is your parietal lobe. Okay, your parietal lobe. And that is kind of where a lot of sensory integration happens, where how that stove is hot, right into your parietal lobe, which processes the information and tells you what to do. And then right at the base of your brain back here is your occipital lobe. And your occipital lobe is basically focuses on your sight, which is weird because you would think your sight would be up in the frontal, but there are nerves that go through your brain to where your occipital lobe controls the sight. Okay? So that's the basic structure of the brain. Now your brain is made up of specialized cells, just like your liver is made up of hepatic cells, your heart is made up of cardiac cells, your muscles are made up of muscle cells. Well, your brain is made up of cells called neurons, okay? Neurons are super neat, and there are 100, roughly, approximately, 100 billion neurons in your brain. And there are, roughly, approximately 100 billion stars in our known universe. So, the same number of stars out my window at night, well, there's billions, 100 billion, are the same number of neurons in my head. So who's not to say, on a super, super, super small scale, your brain is basically the universe. And it is, to you personally, because everything that you see and learn about the universe or see out about you is processed in here. So, just got a neat little fact. But we've got neurons, okay? And so what the brain does, as we're talking about now, and it's pretty self-explanatory, is it coordinates everything, okay? So it's kind of like your telephone operator. And what it'll do is it'll coordinate your movements, you know, if you're walking or running. It regulates your emotions. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you anxious? And it also regulates homeostasis. Now, homeostasis is a big word. Basically, that is the regulation of your internal environment and maintaining of a stable, relatively constant conditions of properties. So keeping your temperature the same or your pH level the same. Just keeping you stable. That's your brain's in charge of that. Now there's a thing called the central nervous system. There are two different parts. Central nervous system's in red. It's your brain and it's your spinal cord. That's it. And that is basically what it does is it takes all the information from your body, takes it in, processes it, shoots it out. It takes it from the peripheral nervous system, which are all of the nerves that occur outside of your brain and spinal cord. Okay? Your peripheral nervous system receives stimuli, travels through your body to your central nervous system, which processes it in a different lobe using neurons and then sends information back out. It's basically what happens in there. And your peripheral nervous system also does something called autonomic regulation. Like autopilot or auto drive, cruise control, that's what it's called. It basically, your heartbeat and your breathing when you're sleeping and your digestion, and it regulates that stuff you're not aware of or conscious about. Okay, so neurons. Again, 100 billion, and it is electricity. Your brain is constantly shooting lightning bolts. I mean, on a very small scale, but it's an electrical storm going on. It's a brainstorm. It's a lightning brainstorm. So what'll happen is every action, every thought, every emotion, every dream that you have is regulated by these neurons using electricity and the releasing of specific chemicals, okay? So how is a thought made? By electricity and chemicals in your brain. So what happens is a stimulation occurs, and I've got another picture, but so neurons are connected in paths, neural nets, neural pathways. And when you say I'm playing a guitar and I play the D chord note. When I do that, my brain is cognizant of the sound that the D makes, the position of my fingers on the guitar, the volume of how hard I pluck the strings, and the memory of that. Now, to remember how to play a D on my guitar involves thousands of neurons. One neuron fires to another neuron, fires to another neuron, fires to another neuron, until the whole process is completed. Now, when that happens, it's basically like you're working out that pathway in your brain. It's lifting weights. It's being used constantly. And so it gets stronger and stronger. And you get better at playing that D, and then a C, and then an E, and then you learn. Now, you can also retrain your brain pathways by, if you don't want to maybe you have a bad habit, stop doing it. If you have bad thoughts or you think negatively a lot, stop doing it and rewire your brain to be happy or positive, and then work that system out. And then before you know it, you can change the way your brain thinks and operates. So that's just a tidbit. And how that happens is this. So here's our neuron. These regions right here where the brackets are, that's just an enlargement. But here we have the cell body. This is basically the body of there we go, the whole neuron. That's where the nucleus is, which is in charge of the DNA and replication. Coming off, I like to think of it as a spider's body. It's easier to picture. So coming off the body are these things called dendrites, or dendritic spines, like legs. What happens there is these spines take up information from a neuron that might be, back here in the line. So maybe this is a recognition of the sound of the note D. So it's going to get fired. So the recognition, or the chemicals that stimulate that learning, come in and hit these spines. Now, there are lots of chemicals in the brain. Namely, the major ones are sodium, calcium, potassium, and chloride. They are all charged. Positive, majority positive, chloride's a negative charge. Sodium and potassium are the main ones that are in charge of firing of neurons, and it's what creates the lightning. So before an action happens, the neuron's at rest, okay? The inside of the neuron here, this is called the axon, by the way. So the axon is where the electrical charge happens. So before the electrical charge really happens, the inside of the axon is a little bit more negative than the outside, which is more positive. So there's kind of just a stable difference. Then, when the electrical stimulation hits, or the chemicals that cause the action to happen in a neuron, the whole action, it's called an action potential, the whole interior of this neuron will change its electricity, basically. So we've got sodium and potassium pumps, or channels, that are located here in this membrane. And since it's already more negative than positive, what happens is 3 sodiums right here, which are positively charged, enter. Okay, so they're coming in. For every 3 that come in, 2 potassiums leave. So if you have more positive than negative coming in, this negative charge is going to change this to positive. So basically, the whole firing of this neuron is negative, positive, positive, negative, positive. This will go back to resting, and then this one will go to be positive. Before you know it, the lightning bolt hits the very end, and this is called the synapse. Okay, this is the synapse of the cell. The chemicals reach the end, and when they do that, calcium ions here, which are positive, it's like they open up the garage door. They open up the garage door of this synapse and these vesicles, and that opening of the garage door releases the chemicals that you're wanting to produce, or the other ions that you're needing to further continue your action, activity, thought, or whatever. Then they come in, boom, and they hit another one. So it's boom, 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 constantly happening for you just to perform one action, these little lightning storms. And so for everything, so for me, putting these down on the ground, and me arranging my hair, and me talking right now, everything that's happening, if you think about it, my heart's still beating, I'm still breathing, I'm kind of cold. All of that is happening, and my brain's regulating all of it. I'm aware of some, and I'm not aware of some of it, but it's all because of these firings in your head of neurons. There's so much more information out there on the brain, so this was just basic stuff, but maybe it'll spur some thoughts, some neuronal firings in your brain, which will spur more and more and more and more and more and more. So basically, you can never stop learning. If you want to learn something, practice it. If you want to stop doing something, practice not doing it and change your habits. Your brain is immense and so full of potential, and the sad thing is sometimes people don't realize that. But by realizing that your brain is all you have to examine the universe, it kind of makes it fun to be able to go out and about and try to, learn some new stuff so you can see things in a different way. So, alright, so that's the one on the brain, and yeah, so hope you enjoy it, and if you have any questions, you can just ask, and I'll hopefully can answer it. So, have a good evening.